So today we will have a look at polyphony in VCV2. This is something that can be a bit confusing, so we'll take this step by step. So first of all, what is polyphony? So here I have a very basic subtractive voice. I have an oscillator going through a filter. This is going to a VCA. And I have one envelope opening the filter, one envelope opening the VCA, and I can play this voice. I have here the key step, right? So I can play it. Right, but if I want to play more than one note at once, basically chords, right, I can't. In this case, we have a monophonic voice, which means that I can only play one note at a time. Now, this is not all, and polyphony is more than this. True polyphony means also that each of those notes will have its own articulation, right? So basically now, in the modular environment, if I want to have, for example, a 4-voice polyphony with this voice, I will need 4 copies of each of these modules, right? So each of the oscillator will have its own filter and its own VCA and its own envelopes. Basically, it will look like something like this, right? So here we have 4 of those basic subtractive voices. Again, an oscillator going to a filter, but here each oscillator has its own filter, its own VCA, and 2 envelopes for each voice, right? Which is a bit... I can play polyphony, true polyphony, but it's a bit cumbersome, a lot of CPU, it takes a lot of space to make this. Right, but again, pay attention that each of those voices has its own VCA, right? So I can... Right, and its own filter, and you can see that the envelopes are a bit differently set also. So each of the voices of the polyphonic voices has its own filter, envelopes, VCAs, and whatnot. So this is true polyphony, right? Now, again, we don't want to have basically copies of the same voice. So in VCV, we have polyphony available, which will do this for us. Basically, it means that we have up to 16 channels of polyphony that can go through one cable and basically create sort of duplicates of the modules internally that allows us to send signals through the different channels and by that create true polyphony. Again, this is true polyphony, which means that each of the voices has all of the modules connected, right? So here I have a polyphonic voice. Again, I can play. I can play polyphonically this voice. Again, in this case, I have up to 4 voices because I chose to have up to 4 channels of polyphony. And internally, I have 4 VCOs. I have 4 filters, 4 VCAs, and also 4 envelopes. 1 for the filter, also 4 for the filter and 4 for the VCA again. Right, so I have true polyphony in VCV rack without the need to duplicate the modules. Everything is happening through the cables. Again, we have up to 16 channels of polyphony through one cable, right? You can already notice that the cables look a bit different, right? They are a bit thicker. Under the view menu, I have also the show tooltips on, which I always recommend having. So if I stand here above the cable, you can see that we have 4 channels. This is row 1 input, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here I have CV input, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here I have frequency input, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 channels of polyphony, so the cables are a bit thicker. If we have tooltips on, we can see exactly how many channels we have and the signals going through them, right? And also you can notice that the colors of the polyphonic cables of the signals are blue and not green like with monophonic cables. So let's really dig a bit deeper and see how we can use polyphony with the MIDI keyboard. So here again I have the key step which allows me to send MIDI into VCV rack, and I have here more or less the same subtractive voice that we had before, right? And I have here the MIDI to CV module, which will again convert the MIDI from the key step into control voltage or virtual control voltage we can use in VCV rack. Now for now I still have a monophonic voice. Right, I can play only one note at a time, and also we will have only one filter, one VCA, and the envelopes and so on, right? But in the right-click menu of this MIDI module, we can choose how many channels of polyphony we want. Again, how many voices will go through one cable. Again, we can choose up to 16. I'm going to choose 4. Already you can see that the cables became thicker. Again, we have a blue signal light instead of green. Right, and again, if I hover above a cable, you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 channels in this case of polyphony. So now I can basically play chords. Right, again, up to 4 voices at a time. And again, it's not only the notes, also now we will have again 4 VCOs and 4 filters and 4 VCAs, right? So each voice is independent from one another. Right, so this is true polyphony. Again, this is what we have in VCV, which is quite cool. Now, there are also a few polyphonic modes here in the right-click menu that we will get at soon enough. For now, I want to show you a few modules that might be helpful when dealing with polyphony. They are from VCV and they are available for free, of course. We have the Viz module, which will basically visualize, will help you see how many channels of polyphony you have. For now, you can see we have 1. If I change this to 5, for example, you see now we have 5. Also, we can see which one is active, right? And if I change this again to 16, for example, we will have 16 channels of polyphony, and we can see this quite clearly. Right, another module that might come in useful is the sum module, again from VCV. This will basically take the polyphonic channels and will sum them into a monophonic cable. Still you will get polyphony, but they will be sort of mixed or summed together into a monophonic cable, which might help you later down the road when using different modules. Again, we will see everything soon enough. Right, so here I have 4 channels of polyphony. You can see the channels here on the sum module is 4. Something helpful this module has is a level control, right, which will allow you to change the level of the summed signal, which can be quite loud. Again, we are dealing here with 4 voices playing at the same time. This can get quite loud. So you have a dedicated level control, right? We still get polyphony, we still get the chords, we still get all of the different modules sort of duplicated internally. But as you can see, it comes in polyphonically, 4 channels, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it will go out in a monophonic output, monophonic cable. So again, this might help you further down the line, further down the road when you patch a bigger patch that has also different modules that might not be polyphonic or will be polyphonic. So this will sum all of the channels into one monophonic signal, right? 2 more modules. We have the split and the merge, right? The split module will basically take a polyphonic signal and will split the different polyphonic channels into their own outputs, right? So here I have 3 channels. Let me just mute this for a second so I can play this voice, right? So here we have 3 channels of polyphony, and I have them separately coming out from 1, 2, and 3. In this case, I'm using pitch information. This I'm splitting to 3 different oscillators, right? So this might be also really interesting to try. Again, we are in a modular environment. You can do all sorts of crazy things with this. We will see examples also later on, right? So I'm splitting the pitch information, the polyphonic channels into 3 different oscillators. Each oscillator will get its own channel, and then from there I'm mixing them or summing them or bringing them together into a polyphonic cable, basically holding those three oscillators. Instead of using three different cables, I'm using only one cable and one polyphonic module instead of three for each one, like we saw before. Right, so this will be the merge. Here we have the polyphonic cable that will go to the VCA, and the ADSR will control this VCA. Again, everything is polyphonic, so I can play now. Right? Three channels of polyphony, three notes together, but each note is a different oscillator, which is quite interesting. So now with this setup, it's easier to show you the different polyphonic modes. Right, so the first one is rotate, which will rotate between the channels. Right, have a look here on the VCA, you will see this quite clearly. I'm going to play only one note, and you will see how the channels are rotating from one to the other. You can also hear the different oscillators playing. Right, so again, this is rotate. Right, so if I play four notes, we get a really interesting result. Now this was, I can do this the whole day. And so this was a rotate. We have reuse that will basically sort of assign different channels to the different voices. Right, so now this will always be the channel 3, this will be channel 1, this will be channel 2, right? I can assign differently. Right, so basically it will assign the channels into their own channel. Right, so this is reuse, and we have reset that will always start from the first channel. So never mind which note I hit, it will always be channel 1. Right, if I have two notes or two channels playing together, it will always be 1 and 2. If I have 3, it will always be 1, 2, 3, because it will always start from the first channel. So you might get a bit more stable results. Okay, so this was more or less using polyphony with a MIDI controller. Let's have a look at using polyphony with a sequencer. So here we have the Sec3 again from VCV. It's sequencing a very simple voice, just an oscillator going through a filter, sequencing it very, very slowly. Right, something like this. Right, I have here 4 steps set, but the Sec3 has 3 rows that we can use, and we can use 3 rows to use for 3 different channels. For this, we can use the merge module again that I showed you before. This will merge monophonic signals into one polyphonic cable. Right, so if I take row 1 and 2 and 3, already you can see that we have here 3 channels of polyphony. And now from the poly output, we will get a polyphonic cable with 3 channels, right? If I show you the tooltips here, you see polyphonic output 1, 2, and 3. So if I send this now to the quantizer, which is polyphonic, and the oscillator, which is polyphonic, and this will go to the filter, which is also polyphonic, we will get 3 channels of polyphony. Right, again, by merging 3 different sequences. Right, there are of course more modules that you can use other than the Sec3. For example, the ones from Aaron Static, also available for free, perfect for polyphony, for chords, for all sorts of different things. Basically here I have the C minor scale, and I have randomly changing chords in the C minor scale, and this is again going to the oscillator. Right. Another module I really like using is the note sequencer from JW. This can get you really interesting results, and it's really easy to use. Right, in the right-click menu, you can change how many channels of polyphony you would like to have. In this case, again, I have 4, so I will have 4 voices playing sometimes in the same time, sometimes not. Right, again, we are dealing with true polyphony. Each voice gets its own VCA and its own envelope. Right, you can see on the VCA quite clearly how many voices are playing at once. Right, so again, a great sequencer for getting quick results or getting results quickly and really easily. Let's have a look now at a few things to keep in mind when dealing with polyphony. So until now, we used only polyphonic modules, which made everything easier, of course, but there are also modules in VCV that are not polyphonic. By the way, if you are looking in the browser, you can see in the tags which one is polyphonic or not. So for example, this VCO, it says oscillator polyphonic. If I go to tangents, for example, filter polyphonic and so on. And of course, there are also the tags that you can search by polyphony. Right, if I choose here polyphonic, you will see all of the modules that are polyphonic. Right, so you can look for only polyphonic modules if you want. Now here I have an example of a polyphonic voice going to a monophonic module, which in this case is plateau. Plateau is monophonic. It's not polyphonic. It will not duplicate itself internally to different channels, to different polyphonic voices. It is monophonic. It will only play one channel. But plateau is working as it should work. Actually, all monophonic modules should work like this. We will see later that it's not the case. Basically, what it will do, it will take the polyphonic channels in the input and it will sum them, it will merge them into one monophonic cable, basically, right? So here I have 4 channels of polyphony, and I'm going to play this through plateau, and you will hear that we still get the chords, but the output, as you can see here, is monophonic, because again, plateau will sum the polyphonic channels into one monophonic cable. Right, so we get the chords. Now again, this might be a bit loud because we are playing a few voices at once. The levels will go up, so it's better if you reduce the levels in the input a bit. I'm going to do this through the VCA. Right, so again, plateau will sum the polyphonic channels in the input, just like with using an external sum module. In this case, we don't need it because plateau will do this internally. Again, this is how all monophonic modules should work in VCV, but this is not the case. For example, here I have the electric ensemble from Flag. This is a chorus, it's monophonic, and it will not sum the polyphonic channels, unfortunately, in its input. This might change in the future, maybe after this video. This might change, but have a listen, see what happens when I try to play chords. We get only the first channel because again, it will not sum the polyphonic channels. Right, I cannot play chords, you can see only channel 1, you can see this on the VCA, have a look here, only channel 1 will actually go through. Right, so again, it will not sum the polyphonic channels into a monophonic cable. So if you encounter any issues, have a look in your chain, which modules are you using, if they are polyphonic or not. Of course, you can use the sum module, just like I showed you before, to sum the polyphonic voice into a monophonic one, and then the electric ensemble will work perfectly. Right, so you have to keep this in mind. Now, there are also other things you should think about. For example, when using a polyphonic module, but with a monophonic signal, right? So here I have a polyphonic voice. I'm merging three channels of the Sec3, just like we saw before. So this is my polyphonic voice. The VCA is polyphonic. I have here 3 channels of polyphony, but the envelope I'm using, The envelope I'm using is monophonic. It's only one channel, right? It will not be polyphonic. But again, the VCA is working as it should. Basically, it will multiply, it will duplicate this envelope and will send it to all channels at once. So usually what will happen what should happen when you are using a polyphonic module with a monophonic signal, the monophonic signal should go to all channels at once and affect all of the channels, just like it's doing here. Right, you see all of the channels, you see this on the VCA, all of the channels are opened. I can also use the trigger here. Right, even though this envelope is monophonic and I'm using a polyphonic voice, as you can see here, we have 3 channels. Here in the CV input, we have only 1 channel and it will go to all of the channels together. This is how modules should work. Sometimes, again, there are exceptions, for example, like with the VCV mixer. I think that this is by design. This is not a bug or anything, but there are other modules that might work the same. Right, so in this case, the VCA mixer is also polyphonic because I have here a polyphonic voice, again, that I can play with the keyboard. Right, this is going to the mixer. The mixer is polyphonic. Also, the envelope in this case is polyphonic, so we get a polyphonic voice. But I want to mix in noise, so I'm going to send white noise to the second input of the mixer. This is a monophonic signal, as you can see here. You can see this here, the monophonic cable. And in this case, with the VCV mixer, it will not work. It will not send it to all of the different channels. It will send it only to channel 1. So you can see here. Right, only channel 1 or only one of the channels is getting the noise. Right? Right, so the noise is not being sent to all channels. Of course, the solution is quite simple. What you can do, there are a few things you can do. For example, using again the merge module and just merge different copies of this noise. So now I have 4 copies. Again, we are dealing with 4 channels of polyphony in this case. And if I send this to the input of the mixer, now we will have noise on all of the channels. Right, now again, because I'm playing multiple voices at once, the levels might be a bit high when playing multiple voices at once. So you might want to do something about it. I'm going to disconnect this because here there's another module that is maybe easier even to use than the merge one. It's called the Polymult from Bog Audio. Basically, it will multiply monophonic signals throughout polyphonic channels. So again, if I use the noise, I can select how many channels of polyphony I want. In this case, again, I want 4. And then from the output, I will get a polyphonic cable with 4 channels of polyphony. Right, so again, things to keep in mind when you are using polyphony, if you are using polyphonic modules, if not, how they work. If you encounter any issues, try looking at what modules you are using. It can happen with mixers, with filters, with effects, with all of the modules you are using in the chain. Maybe you have one module that is not polyphonic and is not working as it should, right? So you might encounter some issues. So those are a few things you have to keep in mind. Let's have a look now at a few more modules that might be helpful when dealing with polyphony. So the first module I want to show you is the spreader from Mokba or Moskva, which will again take polyphonic signals. It will take a polyphonic cable and will merge or will sum it into a monophonic signal that you can use then later down the road in your patch. But it has also a spread control. So it's a stereo sum module that will also spread the voices in the stereo field. One thing to keep in mind, if you want to have monophonic signals on the output, you have to, in the right-click menu, enable merge poly output. So again, here I have a polyphonic signal or polyphonic cable with 4 channels of polyphony. And in the output, I have a stereo signal that the channels will be spread also left and right. Right, if you are with headphones. Right, again, this is without spreading. and width. Right, so you can also spread the different channels in the stereo field. Another version of something similar is the mixer from Bog Audio. There is also an 8-channel version if you want to have 8 channels. But here I have the 4 channels one. Right here you have maybe a bit more control. Now here I have a polyphonic voice that I can play. Right, more or less the same voice, but in the right-click menu of this mixer, we can spread the first polyphonic input throughout the different channels of the mixer. In this case, I have only channels 1 to 4, so I'm going to choose 1 to 4. And now each channel of the polyphonic cable will go to different channel of the mixer. You can see this, right? Which will give me more control. I can change the level for each of the channels. I can mute and unmute. I can pan them differently and separately from one another. Right, I can also add modulation. For example, here I'm going to add modulation with an LFO to the volume. Right, so we get sort of tremolo only for one channel. Right, so you have a bit more control with this mixer, which is also nice. Another module I want to show you is the PolyLogic from Count Modular. Basically, it will take polyphonic gates and will sum them or merge them by using logic, which is quite helpful. So here I have, again, polyphony, pitch polyphony going to the split module. Let me just unmute this split module again to split 3 channels of polyphony to 3 oscillators. I have here energy, FM operator, and the VCO. Now, the oscillators are monophonic in this case because, again, I have the polyphonic channels split to the different oscillators. So they are going to a mixer. I want to mix them. In this case, the mixer is monophonic. Again, I don't have any polyphonic voices going in it. But the gate I have coming from the keyboard, again, from the key step, is polyphonic, right? Because I have it set to polyphony, and which means that also the envelope I get here is polyphonic. Again, modules will become polyphonic when you send polyphonic signals into them, right? So here I'm using polyphonic gates, which will turn this envelope into a polyphonic envelope. So we have now a sort of an issue. I have here a monophonic mixer, but with a polyphonic envelope opening it. So again, we will not get the result we want. Right, we will get again only the first channel. Right, which is not what we want. So what we can do, of course, we can use again the sum module, so I can sum the gates into a monophonic signal. But again, this will sort of merge or mix them. And usually when we deal with gates, this is not what we want. We don't want to mix gates because then it will just get a really high signal, but it will work. Right, but it will work with the sum, but with gates, maybe it's better to use, or usually it's better to use logic. So if I send the gates to the PolyLogic, now we have a few options. If I choose, for example, the OR output, we will get a gate whenever one of the channels or the other or all of them are playing together, right? This is OR logic, one or the other or all of them. Again, sort of combining them, but not mixing them, so the levels will stay the same. Right, so we get the result we want. Okay, another module I want to show you, and this is quite a fun one. Again, we spoke about that this is true polyphony, so each voice will get a different envelope, different VCA, and so on. So not only that you can play chords, you can play a few notes together, but also different articulation for each of those voices. So here again, did I mute this channel? Just a second. Here again, I have a polyphonic voice. Right, I have a polyphonic voice, but for now, all of the sort of copies of this voice are the same, right? We have 4 envelopes, but all 4 envelopes are the same for all of the voices. I want to create different envelopes for each of the voices, maybe something different also with the filter. So a module we can use, it's called Polyphony. From Bog Audio, we have Polyphony 8 and we have Polyphony 16, depending on how many channels of polyphony you want. Right, I'm going to use Polyphony 8 because we have only 4 channels of polyphony. Again, in the right-click menu, I can choose how many channels. I'm going to choose 4. And now I have the first 4 knobs to send basically offset throughout the different channels. So knob 1 will be channel 1, knob 2 will be channel 2, and so on, right? So I can offset the sort of internal copies of the envelope, for example, right? So if this is going to the attack here, I can have, for example, channel 1 with a longer attack, channel 2 with even longer, channel 3 will have a short attack, and channel 4 somewhere in between, right? So now we have right, short attack, a bit longer, somewhere in between, and quite long. Right, so now we really have different envelopes for each of the voices, right? I can do the same with the sustain, for example, just use another polyphony, take the sustain all the way down, and now let's say that they will sustain also at different levels. Maybe I can have a bit more decay here, right? So we have, as you can see, different envelopes. The same I can do with the resonance, for example, of the filter, right? Again, just sending offset, right? So I have, for example, just channel 1 and 3 here with some resonance. All the other ones are not. Right, so it's a really interesting and useful module when dealing with polyphony, Polyphony 8 and the Polyphony 16, depending on the number of channels of polyphony you want. So I want to show you a bit polyphonic modulation. Here I have a polyphonic voice with the FM operator, right? It will sound like this. For now I have an LFO going to the feedback input, but the LFO is for now monophonic, and since the FM operator is working as it should, this LFO will go and will open the feedback for all channels together. Right, but we can convert or turn this LFO into a polyphonic one just by sending polyphonic signal to the volt per octave input, basically the rate, the frequency of this LFO. Right, I'm just going to use the volt per octave output of the MIDI channel. Of course, you can use whatever you want. Right, and now each of the LFOs will have a different rate, a different frequency, and we get a polyphonic LFO. So each channel will be modulated also with a different LFO. And we get interesting rhythms. Right, so again, each channel is getting a different LFO with a different rate. Right, another example I have here, I have again another polyphonic voice. I have Progress, which is another interesting chord generator. This one is from Hampton Harmonics, sequencer, chord sequencer. Right, this is sequencing polyphonically bleak and tangents. Right, going through a VCA and an envelope. And what I do here, I have caudal, also from Volt, which will output smooth random signal. I'm using it to modulate polyphonically the different voices, the different channels. So I'm using merge, right? I'm merging 4 outputs of caudal. This is once modulating the filter. So the filter will move differently for each of the voices. And I have here another merging 4 more voices. This is going to the pulse width of the oscillator of Blick. So again, each of the voices will have different pulse width modulation. So it will sound like this. Right, so again, we have interesting movement. Each of the voices, each of the polyphonic voices is receiving different modulation. Right, okay, now let's have a look at MPE. So MPE, of course, is also polyphony, Midi polyphonic expression. Here I have the Sensel Morph, which is a really fun MPE device. And as I showed you before, in the right-click menu of the Midi to CV module, we have, under the polyphony modes, we have also MPE. And also the Midi CC to CV module is also MPE mode, so you can choose there to use the CC number 74. If you have an MPE device, you know what I mean. But I find this module here for models, this Midi Poly plus MPE module, it gives us more control. Again, it's available for free, so you can all download it and use it. So I'm going to change this here to the Sensel Midi. And if I click the rotate once, I can go left. There is MPE plus also if you need it, but there is MPE, right? So now we are in MPE mode. And now we have volt per octave, which is again polyphonic. I have here an FM voice with 2 FM operators. We have gate. Right, in this case, of course, we have 16 channels of polyphony. We have the CC74 before, maybe I can. Right, so we get this. We have the CC74. This will control the feedback of the oscillator, right? So I can do this. And of course, this is polyphonic. Or MPE even. Right, and we have channel aftertouch. This will be the FM depth. And again, polyphonic. Right, now, as you can hear, there is also pitch bend, but in this case it's quite a lot, it's a bit too much for me. So if you click pitch bend here, you can change the amount. Again, this module gives you a bit more control. I like to go to about 20, something like this, let's say, right? And now it's a bit more usable. Right, so MPE MIDI polyphonic expression is also available in VCV. Again, this has also something to do with polyphony, but let's have a look at a few more examples what we can do with polyphony in VCV. So of course, polyphony will also work in any DAW together with VCV Rack Pro. Here I'm using Bitwig. I have a full video about Bitwig and VCV Rack if you're interested. I have here basically some chords that are just playing one after the other, as you can see here. Right, and in VCV Rack, I have the super arpeggiator from Count Modular, which is really interesting if I zoom in a bit. Right, we have all sorts of different modes it can run in. It can also take only separate notes, an octave up and octave down. It can add also accents. I also have a video where I use the super arpeggiator to create something really interesting and generative. I will put it also in the description. Right, so the voice itself is an FM voice with the FM operator. Basically, it will sound like this. Right. Right, I have here Other Desert Cities as a delay, and of course Valhalla Supermassive as a reverb. Right? So basically I'm arpeggiating those chords. Right, creating an interesting sequence. I have here another voice, and I'm using a different arpeggiator. In this case, it's the one from Hampton Harmonics, another interesting arpeggiator. Right, in this case, I'm arpeggiating the chords a bit with a faster clock. right? The voice itself is energy with some modulation. It will sound like this. Right, so again, polyphony in any DAW, this can work in Bitwig, Cubase, Reaper, Ableton, of course. Right, another voice, of course, we can also use this just as plain chords. I have here Vesec, it's also polyphonic from Volt with tangents as the filter and caudal, modulating all sorts of different things here with some noise. The chords will sound like this. Right, all we need to do is add some drums to this. An interesting thing you can try is separate pitch information, polyphonic pitch information with monophonic triggers, right? So here I have the note sequencer. We looked at it before. It's generating 4-note chords, right? This I'm splitting with the split module to 4 different voices. I have 2 FM operators here, one kick all with some delay, and the macro oscillator 2 OR-plat. So again, I have chords running on the note sequencer being split into 4 different voices, but I'm using a trigger sequencer, a separate sequencer to trigger the voices. I have here the 8-step trigger sequencer from Count Modular. I have one 8 steps and one 7 steps triggering the FM operators. It will sound like this. Right, again, playing the chords, but with different triggers. Right, so the harmonic movement will be the same, but the triggers not. Right, kick all is being sequenced by a 6-step sequence, and again it has some delay. Right, and I have here plats and being sequenced by a 5-step sequence. Right, so again we get the chords, but the sequencing, the trigger sequencing is being done externally with a different sequencer. Right, now since I'm already splitting the chords, I have 4 different channels. Right, from the first channel we should get always the lowest note. So this note I'm using as a base for the percussive vibration. Right? Right, all we need now are some glitchy percussive voices. I have here a tremor 2, I have some noise here with the filter, I have more noise here with some delay, some reverb modulation, all sorts of interesting things. Some glitch. Another interesting thing you can try is instead of using an arpeggiator to arpeggiate your chords, you can use a sequential switch that will switch between the different stages, and you can choose which notes will be on each stage or on each step, right? And you can also insert different signals here. So here, for example, I have the note sequencer, again set with 4 notes of polyphony. This I'm splitting, right? I'm splitting these polyphonic channels into the sequential switch. This one is from Count Modular. So I have step 1 is note or channel 1, step 2 is channel 3, step 3 is channel 1 again, and then we have 2, and then we have step 4, channel 4. Right, but then on step 6, I chose to use sample and hold. Right, so on this step, the note will sometimes be a different note, a random note that is not from the chords. Right, so we have a bit of a surprise there. The voice itself is key call with some delay. Right, it will sound like this. Have a listen to step 6. It will sometimes add a different note to this chord. Right, so using a sequential switch will give you a bit more control, and you can enter different notes and different signals also on different steps. Right, and again, since we are splitting the signal from channel 1, we should get always the lowest note. So this is again a bass with kick all and chopping kinky. Right, you can already hear there is sort of a side chaining here with oppressor because I have a kick with tremor too and a snare with tremor. So before we finish here, I want to show you 2 more reasons why you might want to use polyphony in VCV, even if you are not using chords or anything. The first one is saving space. I have here 6 different sequences, right? ADDR, basic, and 3 rows from the Sec3. I want to quantize all of them, right? So I have to use a separate quantizer, right? I have here multiple quantums from ML for each sequence. This is taking lots of space in my patch. With polyphony, we can quite easily solve this. As you can see here, I have only one quantizer, which is polyphonic, right? So I'm merging the 6 different sequences with the merge module, going to one quantizer, one quantum. From there, I'm splitting back the signals to the different oscillators, right? So you can use polyphony, of course, not only with quantizers, with any other multiple modules you might use in your patches to save space. And another reason, which is quite important, is saving also CPU. I'm going to activate the performance meter. Right here I have the super sample and hold from Count Modular. It's going between 0.3 and 0.4%. Right, which is quite low. This is now, for now, monophonic, but let's say that you want to have 16 sample and holds in your patches, right? So if I multiply this by 16, basically multiply the incoming clock. I have an LFO as a clock going to the polymult. We saw this module before, and this will be the clock or the trigger for the sample and hold. Then you can see we have 16 channels of polyphony, of sample and hold. Each channel is different, right? You can see this on the VCA, different levels. They are not the same 16 sample and holds. Basically now I have 16 sample and hold signals coming out of this one. So again, saving space, but also saving CPU. Here you can see we have around 0.5% for 16 sample and holds, which means that if I have 16 of these sample and holds together with the clock, right, I need 16 clocks and I need 16 sample and holds. We have 0.2, 0.3 for each of them. Right, so it's 16 times 0.3. That's quite a lot, and much more than 0.4, 0.5 for all 16. So again, saving space, saving CPU. Again, this doesn't have to be just with quantizers and sample and holds. You can do this with all sorts of different polyphonic signals, saving space, saving CPU in your patches, having fun with polyphony in VCV Rec 2. I hope this video was helpful. Cheers.